Alex, you're rocking the Hajduk split kit. We've got a few questions on Nico Sigor. He had a big weekend.
It's probably one of my favorite kits. A Hajduk split, got it at a thrift store for like $10. It's the 100th anniversary kit, so you got the circle around it. It's Umbro too, as you can see there. So Umbro makes class kits.
And I've got the LA Galaxy kit here. MLS Cup coming up this weekend, and that's kind of consuming my life right now.
If you're footy kit nerds like we are, I know there's a few of you out there. Let us know. We can definitely do some Easter eggs like this where we throw in some kits, maybe some, related to stuff going on.
Brendan able to join us for the second part of the show. And you've also pulled out a pretty fun kit for this one. And
yeah, I figured since Mimi Aladu is reminding everyone that Portugal is a phenomenal pipeline for Canadian players, I figured I'd bring it out. I won't do the Fly Eagles Fly because that might mean something else in other parts of the world. But yeah, it's great to see Aladu scoring screamers like that for Canada.
I listened to your TSN hit about it. First off, how was Costco? Did you make it out okay? And thoughts on John Herdman leaving TFC? Because it seemed like you had some pretty well thought out opinions. Alex and I were on One Soccer in the moments after it happened as well.
I know this would surprise you guys who have worked with me on this show for 7-8 months now, but I feel very prepared for the Christmas season. Costco's helped that. That was part of the December 2nd run. But as you wouldn't be surprised, I forgot that this phone call on TSN 1050 was happening at that time. So I was in the parking lot to do this, which made for some good banter because Matt Cause is a sommelier, for those who don't know, and they now sell wine at Costco. It was easier to put that run together than it was to explain to someone who hasn't been following the drone scandal and John Herdman. It's easier to explain Costco than all of that to them. I will say this, the biggest surprise is just, I think, the Friday timing. To a lot of people, they would be surprised to see John Herdman step down. We had all suspected that if TFC didn't take the stand that he had to be removed and they didn't want him to be the head coach anymore, that would be done by someone else. And perhaps Toronto FC, we're waiting for that. John Herdman must have known that was possible and that was coming, whether that be some sanction from Canada Soccer, as I saw Neil Davison or John Molyneux, I forget who it was, had actually written it. It hadn't been out there before that Canada Soccer could withhold his coaching license, meaning he couldn't coach games in Canada. While that would allow him to still perhaps keep an MLS position, he wouldn't be able to coach in the Canadian Championship. You can't imagine a corporation wanting to go through the explanation and the PR of that alone. FIFA could have gone a step further, could have removed his coaching badges. Those steps, albeit extreme in my opinion, would be hugely embarrassing for someone who really had galvanized an entire country and had been the face of Canadian soccer for the better part of a decade. It's wild that John Herdman's legacy is tarnished and kind of ends like this. But as I wrote on Canadian Soccer Daily, for me, I am thinking about still John Herdman, the person that took Canadian soccer to completely new heights. I do think this was inevitable. I think it's the right choice that he doesn't continue as Toronto FC head coach. But you can still look at all that and say like, no, it's kind of sad that it's gone this way. And when I was on with Matt Causey, he started to describe it like a Shakespearean tragedy. And I hadn't quite gone to that extent, but when you think about where Canada Soccer was, where it got to with John Herdman, I think Cathal Kelly said it in the Globe and Mail. There's two eras here. There is Canada Soccer before John Herdman, and now Canada Soccer with and after John Herdman. And we are now in the after, which seems so surprising given where things were, 18 months ago, even a year ago when he took the job at TFC.
Yeah, lots to unpack from the John Herdman departure. Definitely feels like the first impression, and that hasn't changed over the weekend, is just this seems to make the most sense for all parties, right? For Toronto FC, you get a fresh start, you get a clean start heading into the off season. In terms of a head coach, you don't have this drag over you, potential suspensions, potential sanctions like the coaching badges. For John Herdman, this allows you to face it all from the front, right? Like there's no potential corporate interests, crossing over. Like, John Herdman is now, not to say, he's on his own, so to speak, in this. Like he's going to be the one who deals with whatever ends up happening in terms of what went on and now what will happen potentially with FIFA and Canada Soccer, etc. So that makes sense for all parties. And yeah, it is a complicated legacy now to assess, because like you mentioned, Brendan, you can't help but think of a lot of the good, coming in and just bringing energy, bringing just that determination to a program that often didn't have people willing to fight for it, right? right? It feels like Herdman came in and was willing to fight for the program to the point he was knocking on doors, right? And you kind of think back to some of those stories, but then also you look at someone who maybe, was willing to go, he was willing to knock on the doors. He was willing to be boots on ground. And sometimes maybe that ended up being a downfall, right? Of, sometimes you end up going a bit too deep. Maybe you end up going down, places where you aren't supposed to. That's sometimes the challenge in the court, sort of the complicated nature of the legacy. So I think it's something for John Herdman. It's wild to think this is how it ends, because, I thought that you mentioned that article. What was funny, and it's very true, you mentioned like, it goes back to one moment, like Canada, Belgium. And like for a moment that was the peak. And it's funny, you don't think of it at the time, because you think, oh, whatever, the World Cup, they can go win Nations League, they can go do this. Oh, now he's at TFC. And I think that was the peak of it all 2 years ago. And we didn't realize it. Like almost exactly 2 years ago. It's funny how this sport works, and that we're looking 2 years later and we're talking about such a complicated legacy that he leaves behind now.
When you look back at it now, you try to find that moment, the high point. Was there a slide after that? I think for a lot of people, Nations League was kind of an eye opener, really tactically. Like, oh, maybe John Herdman has some holes in his coaching game here, and that was a criticism coming into the Toronto FC job. Well, how would this energy, his rile up, his work ethic, his expectation that's such an intense high level that seemed to have maybe waned with the national team players. How would that work when you're doing that every day, especially with a group that's really struggled to have energy and unity as this Toronto FC squad that was, he inherited a very broken team from the year before. For me, looking back at it now, I also think that Belgium was at a high point, but when the slide started was after the Nations League, and I was out for drinks in Las Vegas with some reporters, and I couldn't believe we'd all watched the same game. We had very different Vegas experiences. I wasn't in the press room. I didn't have many exchanges with John Herdman. I think I had one. I had one press conference. We all had very differing opinions. Theirs of which was very much the ship has run its course. This is done. It's time for him to go. And I felt as though afraid for the program, because it seemed like how could they possibly get someone better or go any further? The fact that this run with him was over, and if we were accepting, okay, tactically he can't take them any farther, I didn't think it could get any better for Canada. Especially remember where things were with the federation, with money, with him publicly calling out Jason DeVos and the whole organization. They were without a president, I think, at that point in Las Vegas. It was an absolute mess. I felt very fearful for the program. And then when he stepped down in the summer, I really thought that the only way was down for the men's national team. I'm very happy that I was wrong about that. I'm still surprised that John Herdman's kind of tenure and legacy in Canada has ended this way, because it does feel so wild when you think about the highs of World Cup qualifying and getting to that World Cup. And, I also had a different experience than you guys being in Qatar, where the Croatia thing, there was a real buzz around people who weren't Canadian. People were so excited to watch Alphonso Davies in Canada as well. They were a real wild card. Every Belgian I spoke to, Belgian told me that was the team they're most afraid of in that group, Canada. So it's just wild to think how quick the game can change in 2 years, which is something we really apply to players all the time. We don't, I think, often apply to a structure or an organization as much. And in a lot of ways, John Herdman was much bigger than just a coach in Canadian soccer. He really impacted the institution and the whole sport at many, many levels, right?
Yeah, I think for me, the peak of Canadian soccer and the peak of the John Herdman era was the 10 minutes or so that they led Croatia after Davies had scored the opener. I was at the Dog and Bear with a bunch of the Voyageurs in Toronto, and that was just, pure ecstasy in terms of where Canada soccer was. And I think the Croatia comment actually helped that, because that turned into a grudge match rather than, a one-sided thing, at least in the beginning when Canada led. So to me, that's the peak. But with John Herdman, looking back at his legacy, I think by the fact that he's stepping away voluntarily, at least at this point, we'll see what comes out. I'm sure there's going to be more investigations and more details, and he might still have his coaching badges removed or sanctions from Canada Soccer and anything that can happen down the line. But stepping away on his own accord, I think actually helps his legacy a lot, because he realizes that there were issues here. Yes, he practically lied in the summer at the Leagues Cup press conference when he said that there was never any spying at the Olympics or World Cup. maybe there wasn't spying in Olympics or a World Cup, but there certainly was otherwise, at least in terms of the reports and allegations that have been out there. But I look back at the John Herdman era as vital to Canadian soccer. And I think it's the way that, you look at it as well, Brendan, that, he ends on a very downturn, but it doesn't necessarily tarnish what he was able to do for this team in the moments that he was able to provide for both the men's national team, the women's national team, and the complete structure. Because without him, we wouldn't be in a position where Canada can go and hire a Jesse Marsh. We wouldn't be in a position where we're talking about candidates like Casey Stoney, let alone a gold medal that as of this point didn't have any cheating to do with it. There's so many things that he was able to build structure wise and really reform the just overall nature of soccer in this country, not even just at the national team level, but through every level. Like, everybody knew who John Herdman was, and he had an impact at every level of the game in this country. When it started to go downhill was when he said that we have to take a World Cup seriously. It was that press conference at the Nations League where he was kind of at his wit's end in terms of sparring with the federation. It seemed like it had really gotten to him. He was at a bit of a loss. He had dragged this program as far as he possibly could with the likes of, Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David and Christine Sinclair and all those players on the teams that he coached driving the change. But he'd brought it to a point where it was just not going to change. And that was the point where things changed. That was the point where, eventually he started looking at the TFC opportunity. That was the point where we saw more stuff come out about Canada soccer and all the changes that we've seen in the last, year and a half since then, where Canada soccer is in a completely different spot. And I think a better spot, but they're in that spot because of John Herdman, Alex.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? That's the complicated legacy of, you can't help but look back and, reflect on Canada not being where they are now. And I think that's something that certainly Herdman will be remembered for, I think, eventually down the line. I guess, now it is also too early to comment on all that, just in the sense that we'll see where the dominoes fall first, right? Like, things can change very quickly in this, in this sport, in this place. But you also can't help but, see the way that there was a certain demand for excellence that is now starting to become a standard. And you can't help but look at John Herdman as someone where that all originated for us. So for that, you can only tip the hat, and now we'll see how the rest plays out.
Some good points, boys. Good takes, which will live on the internet and have everyone question why the hell we're dressed like this, talking about John Herdman's legacy ending.